The spark is coming, everyone, because remember what John Locke said? That in order for there to be lawful resistance, including that using of, the right to self-defense, there has to be an exhaustion of the courts, and I believe we just achieved one of them. Let's remember Federalist 78 by Alexander Hamilton. There is no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislators, so Congress, and executive power, so the president, right? The medium of the courts, whose duty must be to declare all acts contrary to the voice of the Constitution, including the Equal Protection Clause, right? Because that's what allows for them to not be capable of going into California, where it is a 40% Latino population, that is 15 million of nearly 40 million people who literally check these categories of what they're going after. This means that they're capable of targeting citizens as federal agents who are responsible for what? Immigration. But me, hablo español, pero I'm not an immigrant. I'm a U.S. citizen, right? So they're allowing for authoritarian law. This is a securement of authoritarian law without actually making sure that anything contrary to the voice of the Constitution is void. Without this, all the reservations of the particular rights or privileges would amount to nothing. They dissolve the rule of law. Federalist 47 by Alexander Hamilton, by James Madison, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, so through Congress, executive, so through the president, and judiciary, through the courts, in the same hands, whether of the one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elected, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Were the federal constitution readily chargeable with the accumulation of power that has a tendency to tyranny, there would be no further argument necessary to inspire a universal rejection of the United States Constitution. John Locke to Treatise of Government, wherever law ends, tyranny begins. Again, this is engraved into the Department of Justice, NDC. Whoever an authority exceeds the power given to him by the supreme law and makes use of the force he has under his command to compass that upon the subject which the law allows not to. Again, supremacy clause is above legislation. Supremacy clause is above the judicial opinion, right? The courts, the Supreme Court, cannot create fundamental law. The Constitution creates fundamental law. If anything is against the little Constitution, including that allows for state rights, and that is authoritarian law. That is the justices allowing for an interpretation that is manipulated for the non-independence of the executive, right? So whoever does this ceases, so stops to be a leader, and acting without authority may be opposed and as any other man who by force invades the rights of another. There can be no pretense, so excuse for the use of force, so 2A, which is only to be used where a man is intercepted from appealing to the law, which just occurred, right? Supreme Court upholds roving patrols for immigration stops in Los Angeles. California is majority minority, which means what? The Supreme Court is negating that there are citizens who fit these characteristics, right? For nothing is to be accounted hostile force, but where it leaves not the remedy of such an appeal, so a legal remedy. And it is such force alone that puts him that uses it into a state of war and makes it lawful to resist him. To this I answer that force is to be opposed to nothing but to unjust and unlawful force. Now, everyone, the spark is about to happen, and it may happen in Los Angeles. And I need you to be strong, I need you to be brave, and I need you to pressure Governor Gavin Newsom to actually uphold his role as state commander-in-chief and utilize executive powers, utilize emergency powers to protect us. Obviously, he's not going to do it. It's going to start with us because they don't give a fuck about putting themselves in danger. They only want us to do it. And that's the thing. We have to ensure that they're the ones running and not us. We have to ensure that we as citizens, those who have citizenships, are the ones who are stopped and not the actual ones who are undocumented, because this is how we make this fall. The spark starts with us. The spark starts with citizens. The spark starts with us actually splitting against this SCOTUS, who is obviously not independent, who is obviously promoting authoritarian law. That is the manipulation of the rule of law to uphold a prolonged tyranny, a prolonged hijacking of the rule of law for a one-man rule. This is the end to the rule of law, and I don't understand why Governor Newsom, why Attorney General Rob Bonta did not prepare for this reality in which this would occur. And I've been holding them accountable, and y'all have been thinking that I've been being too harsh. But I told y'all, when the Supreme Court goes with him, then what? Right? We know what. And Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Locke has told us what. Wherever law ends, tyranny begins, and there is no reality in which we are allowed to have lawful resistance except for the one where we have exhausted the legal remedies. And we just did for immigration. Most importantly, Federal Assembly A by Alexander Hamilton. If the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority and make a tyrannical use of its powers, the people whose creature it is must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measures to redress injury done to the Constitution, all right? Which is what we did, which is what Gavin Newsom has been doing, but we've already exhausted that through this authoritarian law decision of the Supreme Court in Los Angeles. Federalist 28. If representatives of the people betray their constituents or the voters, there is no resource left but the exertion of that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government, and which against the usurpations of the executive rulers may be exerted with a definitely better prospect of success than against those of the rulers of an individual state. So it's easier to go against and resist against the national government than it is against the state government. Here in California, it is much simpler because if we have a blue state government who is supporting us, then they can lead us against the national government. Now, whether Gavin Newsom will do that because he's scared of the consequences is the question, but we should not fear as Californians. In a single state, if the person entrusted with supreme power becomes usurpers or violators, the different parcels, subdivisions, or districts in which it consists, having no distinct government, and each can take no regular measures for defense. The citizens must rush to arms without concern, without system, without resource, except in their courage and despair. In this situation, there must be a peculiar coincidence of circumstances to ensure success to the popular resistance. The obstacles to usurpation and the facilities of resistance increase with the increased extent of the government, provided the citizens understand their rights and are disposed to defend them, like, the right to defense. The natural strength of the people in a large community in proportion to the artificial strength of the government is greater than in a small, and of course more competent to the struggle with the attempts of the government to establish a tyranny. We've exhausted the court with immigration. This is authoritarian law. The rule of law has fallen, and there is no longer any sort of question. Yes, we are in tyranny. Yes, we do have authoritarian law. Yes, the Supreme Court will not work independently. Now, what that means is up to us. What that means is up to the states. What that means has been guided in our fundamentals.